Drink up, dog. Around here, every new fish gets baptized in filth.
Silas Brand tipped the metal cup over Elijah Boone's head, letting the foul liquid spill slowly down his face in the middle of the prison cafeteria. Spoiled milk, grease, and dirty mop water soaked Elijah's beard, ran beneath his collar, and stained the front of his orange jumpsuit, while Silas watched with a smile full of ownership.
That's what respect tastes like when you forget who runs this place.
He pressed the empty cup against Elijah's chest, waiting for him to shout, swing, or beg, anything that would prove he could be broken. But Elijah only stood there, silent and still, filthy liquid dripping from his face and soaking his orange jumpsuit as the cafeteria watched in silence. To Silas, he looked like another quiet inmate on his first day. And that was the mistake that would cost him everything. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The cafeteria of Greystone State Prison buzzed with noise, plastic trays clattering, men shouting across tables, the squeak of cheap shoes on dirty floors. Elijah Boone stood at the entrance, tray in hand, shoulders straight, but not tense. His orange jumpsuit hung a little loose on his frame, marking him instantly as fresh meat. A new arrival who hadn't earned his blues yet. He scanned the room once, taking in the unwritten map. The cafeteria wasn't officially segregated, but everyone knew the rules. Black inmates clustered near the left wall. Latino men had claimed the center tables. White inmates dominated the right side, with the iron circle controlling the back corner, their territory marked not by signs, but by fear. Elijah walked forward, his steps unhurried, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had survived worse places than this. "Hey, tough guy!" someone called out. "Watch where you sit." Elijah didn't react. He found an empty spot at a table and lowered himself onto the bench. The plastic seat was still wet from a hasty wipe-down. He set his tray down and picked up a spoon to poke at the gray mush that passed for oatmeal. The table went quiet. The two men sitting across from him exchanged glances and slid away, leaving an empty space. Elijah didn't notice their retreat. He bowed his head slightly, lips moving in a silent grace before his first bite. That's when he felt it, the shift in the room's energy. Conversations died. Plastic utensils stopped scraping trays. 100 men held their breath at once. Silas Brand rose from his seat in the back, a mountain of muscle in a blue jumpsuit, with the sleeves torn off. His white tank top showed arms covered in crude tattoos, swastikas, lightning bolts, and the iron circle's symbol inked across his throat. His head was shaved clean, his beard trimmed to a sharp point. 5 men stood with him, spreading out in a practiced formation. They weren't rushing. This was theater, and they wanted everyone to watch. Officer Blake Tannen leaned against the far wall, radio in hand, eyes flat with boredom. He checked his watch and yawned. "Well, well," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Looks like we got ourselves a lost puppy." Laughter rippled through the iron circle's corner. Silas approached Elijah's table, a plastic cup clutched in his meaty fist. The liquid inside was brown and chunky, mop water mixed with whatever scraps his boys had collected. "First day, Boone," Silas said, looming over Elijah. "You need to learn where you belong." Elijah looked up, his face calm. "This ain't your table," Silas continued. "This ain't your side of the room. This ain't your world." Elijah's eyes flickered to Officer Tannen, who was suddenly very interested in his fingernails. "Nothing to say?" Silas leaned closer. "You deaf as well as stupid?" "I'm just trying to eat my breakfast," Elijah said quietly. The circle of men around him tightened. "You know what I see?" Silas raised his voice for the audience. "I see a man who doesn't know the rules yet. Fresh meat always learns the hard way. The insult hung in the air like poison. "Rule number 1, Silas said, raising the cup. "You respect who runs this place." He poured the foul mixture over Elijah's head. It splashed down his face, soaked his jumpsuit, and pooled on his tray. The stench was immediate. Rancid food, dirty water, and worse. The room went completely silent. This was the moment most men would explode, throw a punch, scream threats, or break down crying. It was why these displays happened, to sort the fighters from the victims on day 1. Elijah did none of these things. He sat perfectly still as the liquid dripped from his chin. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised his hand and wiped his eyes. He placed both palms flat on the table and took a single deep breath. When he finally looked up at Silas, his gaze was steady, calm, clear. "Son," he said, his voice soft but carrying in the silent room, "you just made a mistake you won't be able to explain later." The iron circle erupted with laughter, but it sounded forced. Something in Elijah's tone had cut through the performance. Silas's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Clean yourself up, tough guy," he sneered, recovering. "And find another table tomorrow, if you're still walking." Elijah didn't move. "Get him out of here," Silas called to Officer Tannen. Tannen finally pushed himself off the wall and sauntered over. "Let's go, Boone. You're making a mess." "Yes, sir," Elijah said, rising slowly from the bench. As he stood to follow Tannen out, droplets of the foul mixture trailed behind him. He walked with his shoulders back, head high, gait steady. Around the cafeteria, men watched him go. A skinny white kid with glasses, an older Latino man with a crucifix tattoo, a muscular black man with a scar across his jaw. They all noticed the same thing. Elijah's eyes weren't frightened, weren't angry, weren't broken. They were the eyes of a man taking careful measure of a battlefield. And somehow, that silence was more unsettling than any shouted threat could have been. Elijah followed Officer Tannen down the corridor, his orange jumpsuit still dripping with the foul mixture Silas had poured over him. The smell clung to him like shame, but Elijah's face remained a mask of calm. Other inmates pressed against the walls as they passed, some sneering, others curious. "Showers down this way," Tannen said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Looks like you made quite the first impression, Boone." Elijah said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate the officer. "When somebody runs this place, you show respect," Tannen added, his voice lower now. "Makes life easier for everybody." They reached a junction in the hallway. A thin, elderly white man with trembling hands was mopping the floor. His blue jumpsuit hung loose on his frail frame. When he looked up, his eyes widened at the sight of Elijah's soaked clothes. "Keep mopping, Pike," Tannen ordered. "This isn't your business." Pike lowered his gaze, but as Tannen stepped ahead to unlock a door, he shuffled closer to Elijah. "Silas never stops. After the first time," he whispered, his voice scratchy with age. "They'll come for you tonight. Laundry detail. Be careful." "Thank you," Elijah replied quietly. "Move it, Pike!" Tannen shouted, and Wesley quickly returned to his mop. Tannen opened the door to a stark, tiled room with shower heads along the wall. "Get yourself cleaned up. You've got 10 minutes." As the door closed, Elijah slowly peeled off his soiled jumpsuit. The cold water hit his dark skin like needles, but he didn't flinch. He closed his eyes and let memories of his SEAL training wash over him. This wasn't the first time he'd been soaked in filth. It wasn't the first time he'd faced hatred, and it certainly wasn't the first time he'd waited for an enemy to make their move. The laundry room hummed with the sound of industrial washers and dryers. Steam filled the air, making the room feel even more claustrophobic than it already was. Elijah folded clean uniforms methodically, his movements precise and economical. Across the room, the old man from earlier, Wesley Pike, he'd learned, sorted through a pile of sheets, his fingers working despite their constant tremor. The door swung open. 2 men in blue jumpsuits entered. They were younger than Silas, but carried themselves with the same swagger. One was tall with tattoos crawling up his neck. The other was shorter, but thicker, with a shaved head and cold eyes. They moved directly toward Wesley. "Hand it over, old-timer," the taller one demanded. Wesley shrank back. "I don't have anything." "Your meds, Pike," the shorter one said, shoving Wesley against the wall. "We know you got your heart pills today. Silas wants them." Wesley's face paled. "I need those." "You need to breathe more," the tall one laughed, pressing his forearm against Wesley's throat. "And your new friend needs to learn about respect." Elijah set down the uniform he was folding and moved across the room. His steps were unhurried but purposeful. "Let him go," he said, his voice low and steady. Both men turned, surprise turning to cruel delight on their faces. "Well, look who wants seconds," the shorter one grinned. "Silas said you might need more teaching." "I'm not looking for trouble," Elijah said, "but he needs his medication." "You found trouble when you sat at our table," the taller one snarled, releasing Wesley and pulling a sharpened toothbrush from his pocket. "We're going to cut you up, Boone." They moved toward Elijah, confident in their advantage. 2 against 1. Young against trained. Armed against unarmed. It was over in seconds. As the tall one lunged with his makeshift knife, Elijah sidestepped with startling speed. He grabbed the man's extended arm, twisted it sharply, and used the momentum to slam him headfirst into a rolling laundry cart. The impact dented the metal and left the attacker crumpled on the floor. The shorter man froze for a split second, just long enough for Elijah to close the distance between them. Elijah's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist and bending it backward against a washing machine. The sound of bone straining filled the steam-heavy air. "Drop it!" Elijah commanded. The shank clattered to the floor. The man's face contorted with pain and shock. "I don't want to break your arm," Elijah said, his voice still eerily calm. "But I will if I have to." The door burst open. Officer Tannen stood there, baton in hand, his face flushed with anger. "What is going on here?" he demanded, though his eyes showed no surprise. He'd been waiting nearby, Wesley realized with a chill. "These men attacked Mr. Pike," Elijah said, releasing his grip and stepping back, hands visible. "That's not how I see it," Tannen said, his lips curling into a smirk. "Looks to me like you assaulted 2 inmates, Boone." The shorter gang member, rubbing his wrist, found his courage. "He jumped us, sir. Went crazy when we just came to do laundry." Wesley stepped forward, his voice shaking. "That's not true. They came for my medicine." "Shut up, Pike," Tannen snapped. "Nobody asked you." 2 more guards appeared behind Tannen. They grabbed Elijah roughly by the arms. "Take him to segregation," Tannen ordered. "Assaulting inmates on his first day. That's a serious charge, Boone." As they dragged Elijah away, his eyes met Wesley's. There was no fear in them, no anger, not even resignation. Just a calculating clarity that made Wesley's spine straighten. In that moment, Wesley Pike understood what he was seeing. Not an ordinary inmate caught in Silas's games. Something else entirely. Elijah sat perfectly still in the small disciplinary room, his wrists cuffed to the metal table. The overhead light buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. His orange jumpsuit still carried damp patches from the cafeteria incident, now mixed with sweat from the laundry room confrontation. Officer Tannen stood at a desk in the corner, scribbling on an incident report form. His pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. Every few seconds, he would glance up at Elijah with a smirk. Unprovoked assault on 2 inmates. Tannen read aloud as he wrote, "Refused direct orders to stand down. Displayed aggressive behavior consistent with violent tendencies. Elijah didn't respond. He kept his breathing steady, his face neutral. The lies didn't surprise him. Prison was just another battlefield with different rules. The door opened with a metallic groan. Deputy Warden Hal Rourke stepped in, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He wore a crisp gray suit that seemed out of place in the dingy room. Under his arm, he carried a thick manila folder with a red classified stamp across it. "That will be all, Officer Tannen," Rourke said, his voice smooth and controlled. Tannen nodded, handed over the report, and left the room with one last glare at Elijah. Rourke took the seat across from Elijah. He placed the folder on the table between them, but kept his manicured hand firmly on top of it. "Mr. Boone," he began, studying Elijah's face. "I don't normally handle intake incidents personally. But you're not a normal intake, are you?" Elijah maintained his silence. Rourke opened the folder. "Elijah Thomas Boone, age 41, widower, one daughter." He flipped a page. 23 years of military service, Navy SEAL, multiple deployments, combat diving specialist, hand-to-hand combat instructor. He looked up. "Most of your service record is redacted, even from me." "That's interesting." Elijah's expression didn't change. "You're here on an assault conviction," Rourke continued, "but your appeal claims you were defending a young woman from sexual assault by the son of County Commissioner Voss." Rourke's mouth twitched into something like a smile. "Quite the coincidence that Commissioner Davis also chairs the committee that oversees prison contracts for this region." Elijah finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "There's nothing coincidental about why I'm here." "Smart man." Rourke closed the folder. "You understand how things work. That's good. It'll save us both time." He leaned forward. "Here's what you need to know about Greystone. Every disciplinary incident goes into your file. Every file gets reviewed before parole hearings, appeal proceedings, and privilege considerations." "I was defending an old man from being robbed and beaten," Elijah said. "The report says otherwise," Rourke replied, tapping Tannen's paperwork. "And in here, paperwork is reality. Your appeal hearing could be delayed 6 months for this. Another incident might push it back a year." He spread his hands. "That would be unfortunate for someone in your position." In a storage corridor near the laundry facilities, Silas Brand leaned against the wall while Officer Tannen checked the hallway for witnesses. "Boone handled Jimmy and Ray like they were children," Tannen said, keeping his voice low. "You need to be careful with this one." Silas spat on the floor. "I don't care what he did before. In here, he's just another inmate." "This isn't just about keeping order," Tannen explained. "Rourke got specific instructions about Boone from outside. The commissioner wants him broken before his appeal hearing comes up." "Why's he so important?" "He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. The commissioner's kid getting rough with a girl at some charity event. Boone stepped in, broke the kid's jaw." Tannen grinned. "Now they need him discredited. A violent inmate causing trouble won't look good to an appeals judge." Silas nodded slowly. "So you want me to push him until he snaps?" "Just make his life miserable," Tannen said. "But be smart. The man's dangerous." "Pride is the first thing I take," Silas answered, repeating his prison mantra. "No one keeps it in here." Back in the disciplinary room, Rourke watched Elijah with cold calculation. "The laundry room incident was bait," Elijah said, the realization settling in his stomach like lead. "You wanted me to fight back." Rourke's eyebrows raised slightly. "Very good, Mr. Boone. Yes, we needed to establish a pattern early. The first write-up is crucial. You're using Silas to do your dirty work," Elijah continued, "keeping your hands clean while he delivers the message. Prisons function on balance, Mr. Boone. Inmates like Silas serve a purpose in maintaining order." Elijah met Rourke's gaze directly. "This isn't about order. It's about making sure I never get my day in court." Rourke stood up, straightening his tie. He gathered the folder and moved toward the door. Then he paused, turning back to Elijah. He leaned down, his cologne filling the space between them. "In here, Mr. Boone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Innocence means nothing. Not a single thing. Remember that before you try to play hero again." Near midnight, the cell doors clanged shut, with a metallic finality that echoed through B Block. Elijah sat on the thin mattress of his new cell, his back against the cold wall. The cell block hummed with whispers about what had happened in the cafeteria and laundry room. News traveled fast in prison, faster than the guards could control it. "That's him," someone whispered. "The man who stood up to Silas. Heard he took down 2 Iron Circle boys without breaking a sweat," another voice added. Across the narrow corridor, a young man with close-cropped hair and tense shoulders watched Elijah through the bars. His eyes held suspicion mixed with curiosity. Elijah recognized the look. He'd seen it on young recruits during his military days, fear disguised as toughness. "You got a death wish?" the young inmate finally called out. Elijah looked up. "Just trying to survive. Same as you." "I'm Darius. Darius Bell," the young man said, his voice hardening. "And surviving means keeping your head down and your mouth shut." "That working out for you?" Elijah asked. Darius gripped his cell bars. "Better than bleeding out in the shower, which is where you're headed." Before Elijah could respond, Wesley Pike shuffled into view, escorted by a night guard to his cell 2 doors down. The elderly veteran's hands trembled, but his eyes found Elijah's with quiet gratitude. After the guard left, Wesley spoke softly. "Thank you for what you did." Darius snorted. "Don't thank him. He just painted a target on all of us." Wesley sat heavily on his bunk. "Target was already there, son. This place runs on invisible lines. The Iron Circle controls the west side of the cafeteria. They decide who sits where, who eats what, and who gets punished. Guards like Tannen look the other way, because Silas keeps the other gangs in check." "How long have you been here?" Elijah asked. 3 years, Wesley replied, rubbing his thin wrists. "Used to be an accountant. Made some bad choices when my wife got sick. No insurance." He gave a bitter laugh. "Thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed." Darius paced his cell. "The Iron Circle's been recruiting me since day 1. Say they can protect me. Maybe they're right. Protection comes with a price," Elijah said quietly. "Everything does in here," Darius shot back. "You some kind of preacher or something?" Elijah smiled slightly. "No, just someone who's seen what happens when good men choose the wrong side." He could have told them about his SEAL training, about missions in countries whose names never appeared in official reports, about men who started with small compromises and ended with blood on their hands. But he didn't. Some truths were better saved for when they mattered most. Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent lights and the grinding sound of cell doors opening. Breakfast meant returning to the cafeteria, returning to face Silas and his men. Elijah watched as Iron Circle members took control of the breakfast line, shoving weaker inmates to the back. They moved with the confidence of men who knew the guards wouldn't interfere. Officer Tannen stood by the wall, his eyes meeting Silas's in silent communication. Rather than confront them directly, Elijah studied the room. He noted which cameras worked and which were just empty housings. He observed the guard rotation patterns and the 30-second blind spot near the kitchen entrance. Most importantly, he watched how inmates segregated themselves, not just by race, but by who they feared most. After breakfast, Elijah approached Wesley in the recreation yard. "Your medication," he said quietly. "They're going to keep coming for it." Wesley nodded. "Can't hide it. They search my cell regular." "Not if it's not in your cell," Elijah replied. "There's a loose brick in the shower wall, 3rd from the bottom in the corner stall. The mortar's gone. Use it. Later, he found Darius alone near the weight pile, staring at the Iron Circle members who controlled the equipment. "They'll offer you protection again today," Elijah said, standing beside him. "Maybe after lunch." Darius tensed. "You don't know what it's like for someone like me in here." "Don't sell your soul for safety," Elijah advised. "It never stays safe for long." "Easy for you to say," Darius snapped. "You got nothing to lose." "I have exactly what you have," Elijah answered. "My dignity, my future, my chance to walk out of here someday and still recognize myself in the mirror." Darius didn't reply, but the hardness in his eyes softened slightly. Across the yard, Silas Brand watched as Elijah moved from Wesley to Darius, then exchanged brief words with a Latino inmate about shower schedules. Boone wasn't acting like most newcomers, who stayed with their own kind and kept their heads down. Instead, he was talking to different groups, making connections, observing patterns. Silas crushed his cigarette under his boot. Boone wasn't just stubborn, he was building something, and that made him more dangerous than Silas had first thought. Later that morning, a buzzer echoed through the cell block. Guards appeared at each end of the tier, batons ready. "Yard time!" one shouted. "Everyone out! Move it!" Inmates filed through the narrow doorway into the concrete yard. The spring sun hung in a cloudless sky, but offered little warmth against the chill wind that swept across the open space. Chain-link fences topped with razor wire surrounded the yard, creating a cage within the larger prison. Elijah stepped into the yard, his orange jumpsuit making him stand out among the sea of blue. Most new inmates would have huddled near the wall, seeking invisibility. Instead, Elijah walked with unhurried purpose toward the empty benches near the fence line. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Darius being approached by two Iron Circle members. They spoke in hushed tones, gesturing toward Silas, who stood watching from across the yard. Elijah could read the pressure in their body language. The recruitment had begun. He had just sat down when a shadow fell across him. "Stand up, Boone." Silas Brand stood there, flanked by 4 members of his gang. His white tank top revealed arms covered in crude prison tattoos, symbols of hate mixed with claims of strength. Behind him, Officer Tannen leaned against the wall, watching with bored interest. Elijah rose slowly, his hands visible at his sides. He knew the cameras mounted above the yard were recording everything. He kept his expression neutral, giving away nothing. "You embarrassed my boys yesterday," Silas said, loud enough for nearby inmates to hear. "Now you're going to apologize. On your knees." The yard grew quiet as inmates paused their conversations and workouts to watch. This was the daily theater of Greystone. Public humiliation as entertainment and warning. "No," Elijah said, his voice calm but firm. Silas stepped closer, bringing his face inches from Elijah's. "You think I'm asking? You're going to get on your knees and say you're sorry for disrespecting the Iron Circle? Or I'm going to make sure you never talk to anyone in here again." Elijah didn't flinch. "I defended myself against men with weapons. There's nothing to apologize for." Silas's jaw tightened. He shoved Elijah hard with both hands, sending him back against the fence. The chain links rattled, drawing more attention. Elijah regained his balance, but kept his hands at his sides. He was acutely aware of the cameras above them, capturing every moment. He wouldn't give them what they wanted, footage of him fighting back. "You think those cameras protect you?" Silas laughed, noticing Elijah's upward glance. "They break down all the time in Greystone, especially when Officer Tannen's on duty." As if on cue, Tannen finally pushed himself off the wall and strolled over. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "No problem," Silas replied, smirking. "Just explaining the rules to the new guy." Tannen turned to Elijah. "Boone, Move away from the fence. You're creating tension in the yard." "He shoved me, officer," Elijah said evenly. "I didn't see that," Tannen replied, pulling out his notepad. "What I see is you refusing to follow orders and creating a disturbance. That's a write-up." As Tannen scribbled on his notepad, Silas leaned in and whispered, "Next time, there won't be cameras. Next time, there won't be witnesses." 30 minutes later, Elijah sat in a small administrative office as Rourke reviewed Tannen's report. "That's 2 incidents in 2 days, Mr. Boone," Rourke said, his manicured nails tapping the desk. "I'm afraid your phone privileges are suspended pending disciplinary review." "My daughter is expecting my call," Elijah said, the first crack of emotion showing in his voice. "She's working on my appeal." "Appeals take time," Rourke smiled, his eyes cold, "especially when an inmate demonstrates behavioral issues. Each incident report can add weeks to the process." The blow landed harder than Silas's shove. Naomi was fighting for him on the outside, gathering evidence, speaking to lawyers. Without contact, she would worry, not knowing if he was hurt or worse. "You can't legally block my calls to my attorney," Elijah said. "Of course not. Legal calls remain available," Rourke replied smoothly. "But family calls are a privilege, not a right. And privileges must be earned through compliance." In that moment, Elijah saw Rourke's strategy with perfect clarity. The deputy warden wouldn't need to physically harm him. He would use isolation, false reports, and Silas's gang to break him down piece by piece. Each incident would build a paper trail that could discredit his appeal. A violent inmate making desperate claims. Back in his cell that night, with lights out called and the block falling into uneasy silence, Elijah knelt beside his narrow bunk, his knees pressed against the cold concrete floor. He closed his eyes, hands folded not in surrender, but in resolve. He didn't pray for rescue. He didn't ask for an easy path. Instead, he prayed for strength. Strength to expose what Greystone truly was. Strength to endure whatever came next. Strength to stand as a witness to the corruption that fed on the broken men around him. "I will not bend," he whispered to himself, "and I will not break." The next morning began with a forced shower rotation. Elijah stood in line with the other inmates from his block, a threadbare towel draped over his shoulder and prison-issued soap clutched in his hand. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly glow. Officer Tannen paced the corridor, nightstick tapping against his palm. "Move it along," he barked, his eyes lingering on Elijah with unmistakable malice. Elijah noticed the pattern immediately. Every few minutes, Tannen glanced at his watch. His patrol of the shower entrance grew more distracted. The other guards were positioned at opposite ends of the hallway, too far to respond quickly. As Elijah's group shuffled toward the shower entrance, Tannen suddenly stepped away from his post. "Gotta check something in the supply closet," he announced to no one in particular. "Back in 5. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped into the shower room. Steam billowed through the space, reducing visibility to a few feet. The hiss of water spraying from a dozen shower heads created a white noise that would muffle any sounds of struggle. Elijah moved carefully toward an empty shower stall, keeping his back to the tiled wall. Through gaps in the steam, he caught glimpses of other inmates, some finishing, others just beginning their hurried wash. Then he saw them. 3 men in blue jumpsuits entered. They spread out, blocking the exit. Their faces were familiar, Iron Circle members who often flanked Silas in the yard. The tallest one, a man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, held something that caught the light. A toothbrush with a razor melted into the handle. Prison steel. "Morning, Boone," Snake Tattoo called out, his voice low enough not to carry past the shower room. Silas wants you bleeding before breakfast." The steam parted between them as inmates sensed trouble and cleared out. No one wanted to be caught in the middle. No one wanted to be a witness. Elijah kept his towel and soap in hand, nothing that could be interpreted as a weapon. "This doesn't need to happen," Elijah said calmly. "Whatever Silas is paying you, it's not worth what comes next." The three men laughed, moving closer in a practiced formation. One circled to Elijah's right, another to his left. Snake Tattoo stayed center. "Look at him trying to talk his way out," said the one on the left, a squat man with patchy stubble. "Silas said you might beg." "I'm not begging," Elijah replied. "I'm warning you." Snake Tattoo lunged forward, slashing in a wide arc aimed at Elijah's face. The movement was amateur. Too much power. Too little control. Elijah dropped the soap and sidestepped, his bare feet finding sure purchase on the wet tile where others would slip. He snapped the towel forward, wrapping it around Snake Tattoo's wrist. One hard pull jerked the man off balance. The second attacker rushed in. Elijah pivoted, using Snake Tattoo's momentum to swing him into the oncoming man. Both crashed into the shower wall with a wet thud. The third man pulled his own weapon, a wooden brush with screws driven through it. Elijah moved with a speed that made the younger men realize their mistake. He drove his palm up under the man's chin, snapping his head back. A sickening crack echoed through the steam as the man's nose shattered. Blood sprayed across the white tiles. Snake Tattoo struggled to his feet, still gripping his weapon. Elijah kicked the man's knee from the side. The joint bent wrong with a popping sound. Snake Tattoo howled, dropping to the floor. The second attacker charged again, this time with desperate fury. Elijah caught his arm, twisted it behind his back, and drove him face first into the wall. The man's shoulder dislocated with an audible pop. His weapon clattered to the wet floor. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Three men lay groaning on the shower floor. None dead, none permanently maimed, but all thoroughly defeated. Elijah stood breathing steadily, water running down his body, blood that wasn't his swirling into the drain at his feet. The shower door banged open. Officer Tannen stood there with two other guards, their faces a rehearsed mask of shock. "What happened here?" Tannen demanded, though his eyes showed no surprise. "They attacked me," Elijah said simply. Tannen smirked. "3 injured inmates say otherwise. Cuff him." The guards roughly grabbed Elijah's arms, twisting them behind his back as cold metal cuffs bit into his wrists. As they dragged him past the shower entrance, Elijah saw Darius standing in the hallway, eyes wide with shock. Their gazes met briefly. Darius had seen enough to know the truth, but when Tannen glared at him, the young man lowered his eyes and turned away. "Anyone see what happened?" Tannen called out. The corridor fell silent. Fear kept witnesses quiet. As they marched Elijah down the hallway, he heard Silas's voice somewhere ahead. "I told you he was dangerous. Jumped my boys while they were showering. Could have killed them." The lie spread instantly, racing through the prison faster than truth could follow. Hours later, Elijah sat in a bare, solitary cell. The concrete box measured 8 feet by 10, with a metal toilet sink combination and a thin mattress on a concrete slab. The door was solid metal with only a small slot for food trays. From somewhere down the corridor, he heard the unmistakable sound of Silas's laughter, followed by Tannen's lower voice. Their words were indistinct, but their satisfaction was clear. They thought they had won. They thought solitary would break him. They were wrong. That same afternoon, Naomi Boone hurried across the hospital parking lot, white nurse's shoes clicking against the pavement. Her 12-hour shift had left dark circles under her eyes, but there was no time for rest. She checked her watch, just enough time to meet with her father's attorney before picking up Caleb from after-school care. The car's engine sputtered before catching. Like everything else in her life, it was hanging on by sheer determination. She pulled into traffic, mind already racing through the questions she needed answered. Attorney Lena Harrow's office was downtown, a modest suite with worn furniture and walls lined with legal textbooks. Lena greeted Naomi with a firm handshake, her tailored suit and steel-rimmed glasses projecting calm competence. "I reviewed your father's file again," Lena said, spreading papers across her desk. "The assault charge was inflated. Your father has no history of violence since his military service. The judge's sentencing was unusually harsh." Naomi rubbed her temples. "Dad was protecting someone. He always said a young woman was being harassed." "That's what I found strange," Lena replied, pulling out a folder. "The security footage from the charity fundraiser is missing. The victim's statement contradicts your father's, but there were no other witnesses interviewed." Naomi leaned forward. "The charity event was at Lakeside Country Club. Dad was there helping with the Veterans Scholarship table." Lena nodded. "The alleged victim was Jason Voss, son of County Commissioner Roland Voss." "Voss?" Naomi's spine straightened. "He's on billboards all over town. And his family owns half the county," Lena added, "including interests in several companies that supply Greystone Prison." Lena handed over a stack of public contract records. Naomi flipped through them, her nursing training making her methodical despite her racing heart. Supply contracts, food service agreements, maintenance schedules, all bearing signatures from Voss's office. "My father is in prison for assaulting the commissioner's son? That can't be coincidence." "No," Lena agreed. "And I found something else." She slid forward a staff list from the country club. "The cleaning service that night. One employee might have seen everything." Naomi stared at the name. "Alma Reeves. I need to talk to her." 3 hours later, Naomi sat in a small diner booth across from a thin, nervous woman in her 50s. Alma Reeves kept looking toward the door, fingers tapping against her coffee cup. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Alma whispered. "I could lose everything." "My father is innocent," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "You were there that night." Alma's eyes darted around before settling on Naomi. "I was emptying trash behind the banquet hall. I saw that Voss boy grab a young waitress, pulled her behind the service corridor. She was fighting, crying. Your father stepped in, pulled the boy off her. He was protecting her," Naomi confirmed. Alma nodded. "Young Voss swung first. Your father just blocked him, pushed him away. The boy fell, hit his head on a table edge. Then security came. But when police arrived..." Alma's voice broke. "They took your father away. The waitress was gone. The security tape disappeared." "Would you testify to this?" Naomi asked. Alma's face went pale. "I can't. My brother Tommy is in Greystone for another 3 years. Things happen to inmates when their families make trouble." Her hands shook. "I'm sorry. But that place, they punish people." Naomi reached across the table. "Who? Who punishes people?" "Deputy Warden Rourke runs that prison his own way," Alma whispered. "Commissioner Voss gets him contracts. Rourke makes problems disappear. My brother said..." She stopped abruptly. "I've said too much." Back at Greystone, Elijah sat on the floor of his solitary cell. The concrete chilled his bones, but he maintained his posture, back straight, breathing controlled. The small room held nothing but a toilet, sink, and concrete slab for a bed. The door opened. Deputy Warden Rourke entered, holding a folder. "Comfortable, Mr. Boone?" Elijah remained silent. Rourke opened the folder. "Interesting reading. Your service record. Multiple commendations. Classified operations." He flipped a page. "America's hero, risking your life overseas. Then you come home, and what happens?" Your country throws you in here. Elijah's face revealed nothing. Must sting, Rourke continued. They called you a hero when they needed someone to die for them. Now, you're just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. He leaned closer. Was it worth it? Serving a country that abandoned you? Elijah met his gaze steadily. I served the people, not men like you. Rourke's smile faltered. Your daughter called again. I had to deny the request. Disciplinary cases can't have visitors. The only sign of Elijah's pain was a slight tightening around his eyes. Your appeal hearing might be delayed too. Shame about all these new incident reports. Rourke left, the door closing with a heavy thud. Elijah closed his eyes and resumed his breathing. The cold concrete pressed against him, but he refused to move to the bed. This discomfort was nothing compared to what he'd endured in training. His body remembered how to endure. His mind remembered why to resist. At home, Naomi spread the documents across her kitchen table after Caleb had gone to bed. Supply contracts, staff lists, court records. Her eyes kept returning to one signature, Roland Voss. His name appeared on Greystone prison contracts worth millions. Suddenly, the connections crystallized. Her father had stopped Voss's son from assaulting a woman. The conviction sent him to Greystone, a prison financially connected to Voss himself. It's all connected, she whispered, tracing the lines between documents. Her father wasn't just fighting for freedom. He was trapped in a system designed to silence him. The realization settled over her like a cold weight. This wasn't just injustice. It was machinery. The cell door clanged open, breaking the silence of solitary confinement. Elijah blinked against the sudden harsh light from the corridor. On your feet, Boone, Officer Tannen ordered, slapping his baton against the door frame. Your vacation's over. Elijah rose slowly, muscles tight from 3 days on concrete. He kept his expression neutral despite the pain. Deputy Warden wants you to understand something, Tannen said, leaning close enough for Elijah to smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. You're on thin ice. One more incident, and you'll be back in here for a month, maybe longer. Elijah said nothing, just clasped his hands behind his back, the military stance he defaulted to when threatened. Nothing to say, Tannen sneered. Good. Keep it that way. The walk back to the cell block felt longer than it should. Inmates watched from their cells as Elijah passed. Some turned away. Others stared openly, curious about the man who had survived 3 attacks in his first week. When they reached the cell block, Tannen gave Elijah a small shove. Play nice with the other children. The cell block was in its morning routine. Men lined up for meds, sat at tables playing cards, or stood in small groups talking. The atmosphere shifted when Elijah entered. Conversations paused. Eyes darted toward him, then away. Elijah spotted Darius folding laundry near their bunks. He walked over, noticing how Darius's shoulders tensed. Morning? Elijah said quietly. Darius glanced around nervously. Hey! He moved slightly away, creating distance between them. You all right? Elijah asked. Fine. Darius focused on folding a sheet, his movements rushed. Just trying to keep my head down. You should too. Elijah understood immediately. Fear had gotten to the young man. Darius! Look, no offense. Darius cut him off, voice low but harsh. But I've got 2 years left. I don't need trouble. Before Elijah could respond, the block door banged open. Officer Tannen marched in with 3 guards. Surprise inspection! Tannen shouted, his eyes finding Elijah. Everyone against the wall! The inmates hurried to comply, lining up with their backs to the wall. Elijah took his place beside Wesley, who whispered, They never do morning searches. Tannen pointed at different cells. You, and you. The guards fanned out, tearing through mattresses and personal items. When they reached Darius's bunk, Tannen slowed dramatically. He lifted the thin mattress with exaggerated care, peering underneath. His hand emerged holding a small bundle wrapped in plastic. "Well, well," Tannen announced loudly. "What do we have here, Belle?" Darius's face drained of color. "That's not mine. I swear to God, that's not mine." Tannen unwrapped the package, revealing several hand-rolled cigarettes and a small bag of white powder. Tobacco, and what looks like heroin. "That's a serious offense, Belle." "It was planted!" Darius's voice cracked. "I don't use that stuff." "Someone put it there." Elijah watched Silas on the upper tier, leaning against the railing with a satisfied smile. Their eyes met for a moment, and Silas gave a small nod. Message received. Deputy Warden Rourke arrived minutes later, reviewed the contraband, and shook his head at Darius. 3 years added to your sentence, minimum, Rourke said. Plus segregation while we investigate. "I'm being set up," Darius shouted, desperation in his voice. "Ask anybody. I don't use drugs." "Take him," Rourke ordered, turning away. As the guards grabbed Darius's arms, the young man's eyes found Elijah. "This is on you," he yelled, struggling against the guards. "You and your stupid principles. What good are they doing anybody? You stand up. We get knocked down." The words hit Elijah like physical blows. Darius was young enough to be his son, about Caleb's age if Caleb were grown. "Your pride worth my time?" Darius called out as they dragged him away. "Your dignity worth my life?" After lockdown ended, Wesley hobbled over to Elijah's bunk. Elijah sat motionless, staring at the wall. "It wasn't your fault," Wesley said softly. "Wasn't it?" Elijah's voice was hollow. Darius was right. My choices brought consequences to someone else. Wesley lowered himself painfully onto the edge of the bunk. "Silas targeted the boy because he's scared of you." "Scared of me?" Elijah looked up. "Not physically. He's scared of your influence." Wesley glanced around before continuing. "You give men hope. Hope is dangerous in here. Makes us human again." He coughed, his thin frame shaking. "Silas needs us broken and divided." Elijah watched through the block windows as guards escorted Darius across the yard toward the segregation unit. The young man's shoulders were slumped, his future dimmer now because he'd had the misfortune of sharing space with Elijah Boone. Something shifted inside Elijah. Surviving Greystone had been his goal. Endure until his appeal, protect himself, make it home to Naomi and Caleb. But watching Darius disappear into segregation, he realized survival alone wasn't enough. Not anymore. That same evening, the prison returned to the cafeteria for dinner under a tense silence. The events of the morning, Darius being dragged away on false charges, hung in the air like poison gas. Men kept their heads down, trays clutched tight, eyes darting from table to table. Elijah stood in the food line, his orange jumpsuit making him stand out among the sea of blue uniforms. 3 spaces ahead, Wesley shuffled forward, his thin frame trembling slightly as he balanced his tray with arthritic hands. Silas entered with 4 of his men, scanning the room until his gaze settled on Wesley. He strode across the floor, boots echoing. The room went quiet. "Well, if it isn't the old rat," Silas said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Wesley kept his eyes down, trying to move forward in line. "I'm talking to you, vet," Silas said, grabbing Wesley's shoulder and spinning him around. Wesley's tray clattered to the floor, splashing beans across his pants. "I didn't do anything," Wesley said, voice barely a whisper. Silas leaned in. "Heard you've been talking about me to the new fish, telling stories that aren't yours to tell." He shoved Wesley back against the wall. "In my house, that's disrespect." Officer Tannen watched from his position near the door, arms folded, a small smile on his face. "On your knees," Silas ordered. "Apologize where everyone can hear it." Wesley's face flushed red with shame. His legs trembled, but pride kept him standing. "I said, kneel." Silas grabbed Wesley by the collar. "That's enough." Elijah's voice cut through the tension. The cafeteria froze. Every head turned. Silas released Wesley and turned slowly. "Well, well, the quiet man speaks." Silas grinned, spreading his arms. "Finally ready for that beating I promised you?" Guards along the wall straightened up, hands moving to their belts. Tannen took a step forward, eager for Elijah to throw the first punch. But Elijah didn't move toward Silas. He simply stood straight, hands visible at his sides. "You don't run this room," Elijah said, his voice carrying to every corner. "You rent your courage from guards who open doors for you." The words landed like a slap. Several inmates drew sharp breaths. "What did you say to me?" Silas's face darkened. "You heard me," Elijah continued. "You're not feared because you're strong. You're feared because men with keys let you target anyone who speaks up." Elijah's eyes moved deliberately to Tannen, then back to Silas. "You're just the attack dog, and everyone here knows it." The room hummed with tension. For a moment, no one moved. "I'm going to cut those words from your throat," Silas growled, lunging forward with sudden fury. Elijah sidestepped with the precision of decades of training. Silas, carried by his own momentum, crashed hard into two of his own men. Their trays flew up, spraying mashed potatoes and gravy across Silas's white tank top and face. Silas sprawled onto the floor, food dripping down his chest. His fearsome image suddenly transformed into something ridiculous. A single laugh broke the silence. Then another. Soon, a wave of poorly hidden snickers rippled through the cafeteria. Silas pushed himself up, potato sliding down his chin, his eyes wild with humiliation. Nothing could have hurt him more than becoming the joke of Greystone. "Enough!" Officer Tannen shouted, rushing forward. "Everyone back to your seats, now!" But the damage was done. Men returned to their tables, many still struggling to hide their smiles. Wesley stood a little straighter, a glimmer of dignity returning to his eyes. "You want lockdown, Boone?" Tannen threatened, getting in Elijah's face. "Because that's where this is headed." "I haven't broken any rules, officer," Elijah replied calmly. "I didn't touch anyone." Tannen glanced at the cameras in the corners, knowing Elijah was right. The footage would show Silas attacking, not Elijah. "Get back in line," he ordered, turning to help Silas up. Silas shrugged off Tannen's hand and stood on his own, wiping food from his face. The laughter had died down, but its echo remained in the room, in the straightened spines of men who had been bent by fear for too long. As Elijah helped Wesley retrieve a new tray, he caught Silas's stare from across the room. Gone was the theatrical anger, the performative dominance. In its place was something much more dangerous. A cold, calculating hatred. Silas's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed to slits. The message was clear without a word being spoken. Elijah Boone would pay in blood. Elijah slipped into the chapel alcove, a small corner of Greystone that somehow felt less oppressive than the rest. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across the worn prayer books and donated Bibles stacked on metal shelves. This wasn't a real chapel, just a designated area with a few wooden benches and religious texts, but it was one of the few places without constant surveillance. Wesley Pike's thin frame appeared in the doorway, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his years. He glanced nervously over his shoulder before shuffling inside. "We don't have much time before count," Wesley whispered, his voice raspy from years of cigarettes before prison. "They'll be looking for us soon." Elijah nodded. "What's so urgent?" Wesley's trembling hands reached into his jumpsuit, pulling out a small notebook with frayed edges. "I need to show you something. Something I've been working on since before you got here." He opened the notebook, revealing pages of tiny, cramped handwriting. Dates, names, times, locations. "What is this?" Elijah asked, leaning closer. "Evidence." Wesley's eyes lit up with purpose. "I've been documenting everything for months. Every beating ordered by Rourke. Every time Tannen opened doors for Silas. Every inmate who filed a complaint and then accidentally ended up with broken ribs." Elijah flipped through the pages, stunned by the methodical record-keeping. Medical neglect cases, guard payoffs, contraband routes, racial beatings disguised as security interventions. There were lists of witnesses, times of incidents, patterns of abuse. "I may look weak," Wesley said, his voice steadying, "but I was a military clerk in Vietnam. I know how to keep records nobody notices." Wesley reached deeper into his jumpsuit and pulled out something else. A small cassette recorder, barely larger than a matchbox. "They don't search old men as carefully," Wesley explained with a hint of pride. "Everybody thinks I'm half senile. Works in my favor." "Is this what I think it is?" Elijah asked, turning the tiny device in his palm. "Press play," Wesley urged, "but keep it low." Elijah pressed the button. Through scratchy audio, Silas Brand's voice emerged. "I don't care who it is. Tannen says they file a complaint. They get a lesson. That's the deal. Rourke keeps the heat off us. We keep these inmates in line." Elijah's pulse quickened. "When did you record this?" "Last month, near the maintenance corridor. They never check for cameras there because the wiring's bad." "Wesley," Elijah whispered, "this could blow everything open." The old man nodded. "That's why I need your daughter's help. Your appeal gives us cover." "Cover?" "Legal mail. They can't open it without you present." Wesley tapped the notebook. "We put this information in your appeal documents to your daughter. She takes it outside to someone who can help." Elijah squeezed Wesley's shoulder gently. "You've been fighting all along, haven't you? Just not the way they expected." "The quiet fight," Wesley nodded. "Sometimes it's the only kind that works." "We need a backup route," Elijah cautioned. "Never trust a single extraction plan." Wesley shook his head urgently. "No time. Rourke's going to move against you after what happened in the cafeteria. This envelope needs to leave tomorrow morning. First mail run." They carefully copied the most damning evidence and slipped it into Elijah's legal envelope alongside legitimate appeal documents. Wesley's hands shook as he sealed it. "Keep your head down tomorrow," Elijah warned. "Don't act different. Don't look nervous." "I've been invisible for years," Wesley said. "One more day won't be hard." The loudspeaker crackled. 5 minutes to count. Return to your cells immediately." They separated quickly, Wesley shuffling away with practiced frailty. Elijah watched him go, this man who'd been gathering ammunition all along while everyone dismissed him as broken. During count, Elijah stood stoically at his cell door as Tannen moved down the line, counting each prisoner. When Tannen reached Wesley's cell, Elijah noticed the guard pausing slightly, eyes narrowing at Wesley's unusual stillness. Wesley was trying too hard not to look nervous. Tannen's gaze lingered a beat too long before moving on. The next morning, the legal mail envelope was collected. Elijah felt a surge of hope. Their evidence was finally headed out of Greystone, beyond Rourke's reach. That hope lasted exactly 4 hours. Elijah was pulled from the laundry detail and escorted to Rourke's office. The deputy warden sat behind his polished desk, a picture of bureaucratic authority in his pressed uniform. On the desk lay an opened envelope, Elijah's legal mail, and beside it, something broken and mangled. "Interesting reading material, Mr. Boone," Rourke said, gesturing to Wesley's notebook pages spread across his desk. "Creative fiction, perhaps?" Elijah remained silent, eyes fixed on the smashed recorder. Its plastic casing was cracked, its tiny tape pulled out and snipped. "Your friend Pike has quite an imagination," Rourke continued, leaning forward. "Unfortunately, it's earned him some time in protective custody. For his own safety, of course." "Legal mail can't be opened without the inmate present," Elijah said flatly. "That's federal policy." "Is it?" Rourke's eyebrows rose in mock concern. "How unfortunate that your envelope was damaged in processing. Water leak in the mailroom. Very messy. We had to verify the contents for security purposes." He picked up the crushed recorder and dropped it onto the desk in front of Elijah. The sound of broken plastic hitting wood echoed in the room. "You had one miracle," Rourke said, his voice hardening. "You wasted it." The lights throughout Greystone blinked 3 times, the signal for emergency lockdown. Guards shouted orders as inmates were herded back to their cells like cattle. Doors slammed shut with metallic finality, each clang echoing through the concrete corridors. Elijah sat alone on the cold metal bed in his solitary cell, his face expressionless despite the pain radiating from his ribs. 2 of Rourke's most trusted guards had escorted him here after the meeting, their batons finding his midsection when security cameras couldn't see. Through the small window in his door, Elijah watched the frantic activity in the corridor. Something was happening. The guards moved with unusual urgency, their walkie-talkies crackling with coded messages. "Medical to C block! Now!" Elijah pressed his face against the cold metal door, straining to see. In the narrow slice of hallway visible through his window, he caught a glimpse of a stretcher being rushed past. On it lay a bloody figure, face swollen beyond recognition. But Elijah knew those thin arms, that gray hair matted with blood. Wesley. Elijah's fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. He pounded once on the door, the sound swallowed by the chaos outside. No one even turned to look. Hours passed in suffocating silence. The lockdown continued as night fell, the cell growing darker until only a thin beam of light from the corridor illuminated the small space. The door opened suddenly. Rourke stood there, immaculate in his uniform despite the late hour. "Mr. Pike had an unfortunate accident," he said, not bothering to step inside. "Tripped on the stairs, multiple contusions, possible concussion. He's receiving excellent care in our infirmary under protective custody." "Protective custody," Elijah repeated, the words like ash in his mouth. "Indeed, and young Mr. Bell remains in segregation. The contraband found in his possession carries serious penalties." Elijah said nothing, but his eyes never left Rourke's face. "I also have news about your appeal," Rourke continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Given your recent disciplinary issues, assaulting inmates in the shower, inciting disturbances in the cafeteria, the hearing has been postponed. Indefinitely. My daughter will—" "Your daughter's visitation privileges have been suspended," Rourke cut in. "Security concerns. You understand?" The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Elijah alone with the news. The trap was complete. Wesley beaten and isolated. Darius locked away on false charges. Naomi blocked from visiting or helping. And the evidence they'd worked to gather, destroyed. Elijah sat on the edge of his bunk, his body rigid with controlled fury. The careful discipline he'd maintained his entire adult life felt suddenly like a chain rather than strength. What had restraint earned him? A wrongful conviction. A prison sentence. Allies who suffered because they trusted him. For the first time since entering Greystone, Elijah questioned whether his approach was right. Perhaps there were times when violence was the answer, times when men like Rourke and Silas only understood force. His hands trembled slightly as memories of combat surfaced. the efficiency with which he once eliminated threats, the lethal skills he'd spent years suppressing. It would be so easy to surrender to that training, to become the weapon he was made to be. Elijah closed his eyes, fighting against the rising tide of rage. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he suddenly remembered something Wesley had said when showing him the evidence. "Backup routes," Wesley had muttered. "Never trust one route. That's basic tactics." Wesley, old and frail as he seemed, was a Vietnam veteran. He understood contingency planning. He wouldn't have placed all his hope in a single envelope. Elijah opened his eyes and scanned his cell. The guards had left him almost nothing after their search. Just his prison uniform, a thin blanket, and the Bible Wesley had pressed into his hands the day before. The Bible. Elijah reached for it, examining the worn leather cover. The spine was cracked, the binding coming loose in places. Casual observers would see only an old, well-used book. But Elijah's trained eyes noticed something else. The way certain pages bulged slightly, as if something thin was pressed between them. His fingers moved carefully along the damaged spine, feeling for irregularities. Near the middle of Psalms, he found it. A small fold in the binding, where the glue had been deliberately softened. Elijah worked his fingernail into the gap, gently teasing out a tightly folded piece of paper. With hands steadier than they had any right to be, he unfolded the note. Inside was Wesley's cramped handwriting, a cipher using Bible verses as reference points. Below that was a simple message. Books leave every Tuesday. Church program. Psalm 37, 5-6. Elijah turned to the passage. "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday." A thin smile crossed his face as understanding dawned. Wesley hadn't trusted just one route. The real evidence was already outside. The next morning, sunlight crept through the stained glass windows of Trinity Baptist Church, as Reverend Paul Haskins sorted through a stack of donated books. Every Tuesday, the church's literacy program collected gently used books from the congregation to distribute to Greystone inmates. The Reverend had been running this program for years, believing literacy could provide a path to redemption. His phone rang. It was Naomi Boone. "Reverend Haskins," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Have you heard anything about my father?" "I'm afraid not, child. They've canceled my last 2 visits, claiming security concerns." He sighed, his weathered hands resting on the book pile. "But I am dropping off some books today. I'll ask about him." "Thank you," Naomi said. "I appreciate anything." "Wait," Reverend Haskins interrupted, noticing something. "There's a book here that came back from Greystone yesterday. The log says it was checked out by Wesley Pike. Wasn't he your father's friend?" "Yes," Naomi whispered. "Can you bring it to me?" 30 minutes later, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at the worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. It seemed ordinary enough. Dog-eared pages, library stamp on the inside cover. But something made her examine it more carefully. She flipped through the pages slowly, finding nothing until she reached page 84. There, barely visible, was a slight bulge in the binding. Naomi worked her fingernail into the seam and pulled out a small memory card wrapped in tissue paper. With it came several folded pages of photocopied documents. Her hands shook as she unfolded them. Prison medical logs showing untreated injuries. Commissary records with unexplained markings. A list of guards' names with payment amounts written beside them. And most damning of all, a handwritten note from Officer Tannen to Silas Brand. "Rourke says handle the old man before his daughter gets any traction on the appeal. No cameras on D Block Thursday." Naomi plugged the memory card into her laptop. The files contained grainy audio recordings, conversations between Tannen and Silas about which inmates needed lessons, Rourke discussing how to delay appeal paperwork, and, most shocking, a clear mention of Commissioner Voss. The commissioner doesn't care what happens inside these walls as long as his contracts stay protected and his son's name stays clean, Rourke's voice said. That's why Boone is here. Make sure he never reaches that appeal hearing. Naomi grabbed her phone and called attorney Lena Harrow. I have everything, Naomi said, her voice steadier than she felt. Evidence of corruption, prisoner abuse, and the connection to my father's case. Bring it to my office immediately, Lena replied. And Naomi, don't tell anyone else. But Naomi had one more call to make. Miles Grady at the Westfall Chronicle had been investigating prison contracts for months. She left a message asking him to meet her at Lena's office. Meanwhile, back in Greystone's solitary wing, Elijah sat cross-legged on his thin mattress, studying Wesley's cipher. The message was clear now. Wesley had been smuggling evidence out through the church book program for weeks. Photocopies, notes, even recordings hidden in book bindings, all filtering out to freedom one volume at a time. Hope bloomed in Elijah's chest, but his face remained impassive. He'd survived combat zones by never revealing his position. The same discipline would serve him now. When Officer Tannen passed his cell for morning check, Elijah appeared broken and defeated. Feeling talkative today? Tannen sneered through the slot. Nothing to say, Elijah mumbled, keeping his eyes down. That's what I thought, Tannen laughed, moving on. As his footsteps faded, Elijah allowed himself a small smile. The evidence was out. Now he just needed to stay alive long enough for it to matter. In the administrative wing, Deputy Warden Rourke's phone rang. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. Sir, there's a reporter on line 1, Miles Grady from the Westfall Chronicle. He's asking about prisoner abuse allegations and Commissioner Voss's supply contracts. Rourke's coffee mug shattered against the wall. Tell him I'm in meetings all day, he barked, then slammed his fist on the desk. How had this happened? The recorder was destroyed. Wesley was in the infirmary, barely conscious. Boone was in solitary. Unless... Get Tannen in here, now, he shouted. When Officer Tannen entered minutes later, Rourke was already shredding documents. We have a problem, Rourke said, his voice dangerously calm. Someone's talking to reporters about our arrangement with Voss. Impossible, Tannen said. We've got the old men locked down tight. Apparently not tight enough. Rourke wiped sweat from his forehead. I've just heard the State Corrections Board is sending investigators. They'll be here tomorrow morning. Tannen's face went pale. What do we do? Find Silas, Rourke ordered. Tell him Boone needs to be handled today. I want him destroyed publicly. Something that looks like inmate violence. Not us. Make it happen during the dinner hour when everyone will see. And if he fights back? Tannen asked. Then make sure he doesn't walk away from it. Rourke's eyes were cold. We need to make him look like the violent one before those investigators step foot in here. Our careers depend on it. That afternoon, Greystone remained in lockdown, but Officer Tannen marched through the cell blocks, announcing a mandatory all-unit meal. Inmates exchanged nervous glances. A full cafeteria during lockdown wasn't normal. Everyone moves in 10 minutes, Tannen barked, slapping his baton against the bars. Warden's orders. Elijah was escorted from solitary by 2 guards who kept their distance, as if they knew what was coming. Their silence told him everything he needed to know. This was theater, and he was meant to play the villain. The cafeteria filled with tense energy as inmates filed in under heavy supervision. Guards lined the walls but seemed oddly passive, watching rather than controlling. Elijah moved through the food line with steady calm, his orange jumpsuit marking him as a target among the sea of blue. The man's dead, someone whispered as Elijah passed. Silas is coming for him. Elijah chose a seat at an empty table, placing his tray down with deliberate care. He scanned the room, noting camera positions and exit points. Years of combat had taught him to read situations before they exploded. This one had "ambush" written all over it. The double doors swung open. Silas entered flanked by Iron Circle members in blue jumpsuits. But Silas wore his white tank top and blue pants like a uniform of authority, a visual reminder of his special status. The room fell silent as he strutted between the tables, a plastic cup gripped in his hand. Officer Tannen leaned against the wall, radio conveniently silent. Silas stopped directly in front of Elijah, his shadow falling across the table. "Heard you been lonely and solitary," Silas said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thought you might want a drink to celebrate your return." Elijah looked up slowly. This moment mirrored their first encounter. The same cup, the same posture, the same attempt at humiliation. But something had changed in the room. The fear had shifted. Silas overturned the cup, pouring a foul mixture of mop water and food waste over Elijah's head. The liquid ran down his face, dripping onto the jumpsuit. But this time, nobody laughed. Instead, chairs scraped against the floor as men stood up, first at one table, then another. Black inmates, Latino inmates, older white prisoners, men who had stayed silent for years, men who had watched Wesley dragged away broken, men who had seen Darius framed. Elijah wiped his face with the same calm he'd shown that first day. He could feel the room's energy changing, not toward riot, but toward witness. "You think they'll save you?" Silas sneered, glancing nervously at the standing men. Elijah slowly rose to his feet, water dripping from his chin. "No," he said quietly. "I think they're done saving you." The words landed like a verdict. Silas's face twisted with rage. "You're nothing but a stupid man playing hero," he spat. "And heroes bleed in here." "First move is yours," Elijah said, hands visible and open. "Always has been." Silas lunged forward, swinging a heavy fist at Elijah's head. Elijah slipped the punch with minimal movement, causing Silas to stumble past him. "Hold positions!" Tannen shouted to the other guards, who had started moving forward. "Let them handle it." The room understood what was happening. This wasn't just a fight. It was an execution disguised as inmate violence. Silas recovered quickly and charged again, throwing a combination of punches. Elijah blocked the first two, but caught the third on his ribs, wincing at the impact. He countered with a precise strike to Silas's sternum that sent him staggering backward. Trays clattered to the floor. Chairs toppled. The watching inmates formed a wide circle, not joining but refusing to look away. "Kill him!" Tannen yelled to Silas, no longer caring who heard. Silas's eyes flashed with desperation. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a gleaming metal shank, 6 inches of sharpened steel smuggled past security. The room gasped collectively. This wasn't a fair fight. It was meant to be a murder. Elijah stepped back, calculating distances. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his ribs aching from Silas's punch. Despite his training, he was injured, outnumbered, and facing a younger armed opponent. Silas circled, blade extended. "No more talk," he growled. "No more discipline. Just you bleeding out on the floor." Elijah settled into a combat stance, hands raised, feet positioned for movement. His face showed no fear, only focus, the same expression he'd worn in countless operations when outgunned and surrounded. The cafeteria had fallen completely silent. Every eye watched as Silas raised the blade and prepared to lunge at Elijah Boone, standing calm and alone in an orange jumpsuit, still dripping with filthy water. The cafeteria erupted into chaos as Silas lunged forward, blade flashing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Elijah pivoted at the last possible moment, the sharpened steel slicing through his jumpsuit sleeve instead of his heart. A thin line of blood appeared on his arm, but the wound was superficial, a graze instead of a killing blow. Silas snarled and attacked again, slashing wildly. His rage made him dangerous, but careless. Elijah moved with practiced economy, each step deliberate, despite the pain in his ribs. He watched Silas's eyes rather than the blade, anticipating each thrust before it came. "Stand still and die!" Silas shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. The inmates who had formed a circle around them remained transfixed. This wasn't just violence, it was a clash between two forces that had defined their prison lives. Raw power against quiet discipline. Elijah blocked a downward strike with his forearm, grimacing as the blade cut his skin. In that split second of contact, he trapped Silas's wrist, twisted sharply, and applied crushing pressure to the tendons. The shank clattered to the floor as Silas howled. Before Silas could recover, Elijah swept his leg, throwing him off balance. He used Silas's momentum against him, driving him backward until they crashed into a cafeteria table. Food trays went flying as Elijah slammed Silas face down onto the hard surface. With practiced precision, Elijah locked Silas's arm behind his back, pressing it upward at an angle that promised to snap bone if pushed just 1 inch further. His knee dug into Silas's back, pinning him completely. Blood trickled down Elijah's arm. His breathing was labored, and his injuries were showing. But his grip remained unbreakable as Silas thrashed and cursed beneath him. "I could break you," Elijah said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I came here to break the system that made you think you were king." The words echoed through the stunned cafeteria. No one moved. Not the inmates, not the guards, not even Officer Tannen, who stood frozen by the door. At that precise moment, the cafeteria doors burst open. A line of men and women in suits entered, flanked by state police officers wearing tactical vests. Behind them came more officials carrying folders and equipment. "Department of Corrections Oversight Committee," announced a tall woman at the front. "Nobody move." Tannen's face drained of color. He turned to flee through the side exit, but 2 officers intercepted him, slamming him against the wall and cuffing his hands behind his back. "Officer Blake Tannen," one investigator said, reading from a document. "You're under arrest for prisoner abuse, evidence tampering, and conspiracy." More officials poured through the doors, some heading straight for the security office, others photographing the scene in the cafeteria. Elijah maintained his hold on Silas, who had stopped struggling as reality crashed down around him. Deputy Warden Rourke appeared in the doorway, his usual polish gone, tie loosened, and face flushed. "This is a procedural violation," he shouted. "You have no jurisdiction to enter without—" "We have emergency authorization," interrupted a man in a dark suit, holding up court documents. "Based on evidence of systematic prisoner abuse, medical neglect, and corruption. Hal Rourke, you're being removed from your position pending investigation." 2 officers approached Rourke, handcuffs ready. His face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is a prison," he sputtered. "We maintain order how we must. These men are animals." "Not to the law," replied the official, nodding toward Elijah. "And not to those who still believe in justice." Throughout the cafeteria, investigators were already seizing security footage, collecting witness statements, and documenting injuries. Medical personnel moved toward Elijah, who finally released Silas into the custody of waiting officers. Silas looked wildly around for support from his Iron Circle members. Not one stepped forward. They averted their eyes or backed away, their fear of him already evaporating in the face of real authority. "You're nothing without me," Silas shouted as they dragged him away. "Nothing!" No one answered. His power had vanished like smoke. The cafeteria watched in stunned silence as Rourke was led out in handcuffs, his protests fading as the doors closed behind him. The system that had protected him, that had empowered men like Silas to terrorize others, was being dismantled before their eyes. The next morning, Greystone looked different. State officials in crisp suits replaced the usual guards at checkpoints. Cameras that had been broken for months now functioned perfectly. Elijah noticed these changes as two corrections officers he'd never seen before escorted him from his cell. Instead of the usual rough handling, they spoke to him with respect. "Mr. Boone, please come with us." No handcuffs, no shoving, just "please" and "Mr. Boone." They led him not to solitary, but to a clean interview room with actual windows. Sunlight streamed across a table where a woman in a charcoal suit waited with several folders spread before her. "Mr. Boone, I'm attorney Lena Harrow from the Civil Rights Division," she said, extending her hand. "I've been reviewing your case since yesterday evening." Elijah sat carefully, his ribs still sore from Silas's attack. "My case or this prison?" "Both." She opened the top folder. "All disciplinary charges against you have been dismissed. The recordings and documentation that Wesley Pike smuggled out exposed exactly what's been happening here." She laid out photos, transcripts, and medical reports. Guard corruption, organized racial violence, medical neglect, and a contract scheme connecting Commissioner Voss to Deputy Warden Rourke. Elijah's eyes narrowed. "And my original conviction?" Attorney Harrow smiled thinly. "That's why I'm here." Your daughter wouldn't take no for an answer. The door opened, and Naomi rushed in. Elijah stood, wincing through pain, and held his daughter as she sobbed against his shoulder. "You were right," she whispered. "You were always right." When they separated, Naomi wiped her eyes and spoke clearly. "We found the security footage from the fundraiser. The commissioner's office misplaced it after your arrest." Attorney Harrow nodded. "It clearly shows you intervened to protect a young woman from Commissioner Voss's son. 3 witnesses have come forward now that they're not being threatened." She slid forward a court order. "Your conviction has been overturned, Mr. Boone. You're free to leave today." Elijah stared at the document, unable to speak. 40 years of life had taught him to be suspicious of sudden mercy. "Wesley?" he finally asked. "Transferred to the Veterans Hospital this morning," Naomi said. "They're treating his injuries properly now." "And Darius Bell?" "The planted contraband charge has been dismissed," Attorney Harrow confirmed. "And we're reopening his entire case. The public defender who pushed him into that plea deal has been suspended pending investigation." Elijah absorbed this news slowly. "What about the others? Tannen? Rourke? Silas?" "Silas Brand faces multiple new charges for assault and witness intimidation," Attorney Harrow explained. "Officer Tannen is cooperating to reduce his own sentence. Typical coward. Rourke has been indicted on 16 counts so far." "And Commissioner Voss?" Elijah's voice hardened. Naomi smiled grimly. "The press got everything. He tried holding a news conference to deny it. But they played Wesley's recordings live on 3 channels. He walked off stage. His career is over." For the first time in weeks, Elijah felt something like peace settle over him. Not joy. He'd seen too much for that. But the quiet satisfaction of truth, finally having its day. 3 weeks later, Elijah Boone walked through Greystone's front gates wearing his own clothes, pressed khaki pants, a navy button-down shirt, and the watch his late wife had given him 20 years before. Naomi waited beyond the fence with Caleb, who broke free from his mother's grip and ran to Elijah. "You're finally home!" Elijah scooped the boy up, holding him tight despite his still healing ribs. Over Caleb's shoulder, he saw the prison that had tried to break him. It looked smaller now, less imposing against the blue sky. "You ready to come home?" Naomi asked, embracing them both. Been ready since the day I arrived, Elijah replied. Months later, on a crisp fall morning, Elijah stood outside a renovated office building in downtown Burlington. The sign above the door read, Boone Veterans Justice Center. Beside him, Naomi adjusted her professional-looking blazer, while Attorney Harrow spoke with reporters. Today marks the opening of a center dedicated to helping elderly prisoners, veterans, and wrongfully convicted individuals receive proper legal support, Harrow announced to the cameras. A bus pulled up to the curb. The doors opened, and Darius Bell stepped off, blinking in the sunlight. He wore clean civilian clothes and carried a small bag containing everything he owned. Naomi rushed forward to hug him while Elijah watched, pride warming his chest. Behind Darius came Wesley Pike, thin but alert, pushed in a wheelchair by a medical assistant. When he spotted Elijah, Wesley raised a trembling hand in a military salute. Elijah returned it crisply. "You saved my life," Wesley said when Elijah approached. "We saved each other," Elijah corrected him. Darius joined them, standing awkwardly until Elijah pulled him into a hug. "Told you I'd see you on the outside," Elijah said. Darius nodded, struggling with emotions. "Never thought it would happen for real." "That's what we're here to change," Elijah said, gesturing to the center behind them. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Elijah looked back at Greystone's silhouette visible on the distant hill. He didn't smile with triumph. He smiled with peace. The men who had tried to bury him had given him a battlefield. He had turned it into a courtroom. And justice had not whispered this time. It had walked through the front door. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.